Yo, so Grinder Skill, characters here, and today it is part 2 of the mental game PowerPoint presentation series that I'm bringing to you. Last time we discussed tilt and how to minimize it and how to cut it out of your game and how to identify it and all of these things. And tilt's very important. One of the main aspects of the mental game, of the off-the-felt sort of mentality of poker. But one other thing that is also very crucial is sort of training your brain to be a very good poker brain and to have the right attitude and the right thought processes and just to function in the right way to allow you to be a successful poker player. And that is what we're going to talk about today in part 2, poker brain training. There's a number of ways that we can do this. Just before we get into it, if you haven't watched part 1 about tilt, go and do that now, because there's just a bunch of stuff that I'm going to be referring back to. Not too much, but there are some things that are interlinked here that I will be referring back to, and also just everyone should watch it who has a Grinder School subscription here, because even if you think you're only here for videos about poker and to become a better poker player technically, I think there's probably a bunch of stuff you didn't quite realise about your own game, about the way you react, or about your tilty tendencies. So definitely go back and check it out if you haven't already. And next time what we're going to talk about is grind strategy, and that's going to include things like bankroll management, things like just the sort of the way you should plan your poker life, the way you should, how much time you should dedicate to it, what balance of play and study you should have, and what sort of routine you should get into for reviewing your hands and things like that. And I think it's a good way to sort of structure your poker life, so definitely check that out next month. That should be out at the beginning of February, if I'm not mistaken. This is still December when I'm recording this, so forgive me if anything has changed. Oh, Merry Christmas to everyone, by the way. It's a bit late by the time you see this, but, you know, at least I wished you at the time. Hope you all had a good Christmas and are having a good start to 2012 and stuff. Alright, poker brain training. So, first of all, we're going to talk about what makes a good poker player anyway. Like, what sort of features, attributes does a good poker player have that a bad one doesn't? And what sort of processes do they need to be able to do in their brain? And what sort of brain should they have? Like, you get a lot of differently minded people. So I want to talk a bit about what kind of mental sort of attributes you should have. You know, you get creative people, logical people, you get people who like language, people who like numbers. So how does all that kind of stuff tie in? And what sort of things we need to be good at? Logic and problem solving, there's a little clue there as to what one of those things might be, but this is just going to be a more general sort of overview of how logic relates to poker and how solving problems relates to logic and how that relates to poker. So that'll be pretty cool. This is like the core element of what poker is. It is a logical problem that needs to be solved. Every situation that comes up is of this nature. So if you're no good at solving problems, you better get practicing. But that's cool because later on in this video we're going to be talking about things you can do to train your brain. I didn't actually want to say brain training, I want to say like mind training, because brain training is very sort of cliched, but yeah, whatever. So within the poker realm, there's a bunch of poker related things you can do. It would make sense if you want to get good at poker and you want to train your brain to be good at poker. You should use poker related exercises, of course, to a large extent. So that could be like reviewing hands, you know, watching videos like you are now, critically analysing your own play, using stove, all these kind of things are all pretty important. But the thing that a lot of people don't realise is that being a good poker player, as we're about to find out, is about the way your brain functions and the things it's good at. If it's not good at something, but you're interested in poker, then don't worry, there's ways that you can practice. If you're finding poker just a bit sort of immersing, a bit confusing at times, like, there are ways out with poker that you can just, exercises you can do, things that are fun, give you a nice break from poker, but actually make you a better player at the same time, because they're training your brain to think in the right ways and to do all the right sort of processes, and that's really important too. So I'm going to touch on that. And the long ball sort of mentality, we need to train ourselves to think in terms of the long term, to not be results orientated in the short term, to understand how variance works and how it affects your results and the appearance of your graphs over a certain amount of hands. So I'm going to talk a bit about how variance works and why we need to always be long ball focused and not short ball focused. And then we're going to talk about money and success, which is why we're doing this, right? We're not just doing this for the good of our health. We're all... God, that's such a bad cliche. Excuse the cliches today, seriously. But we're not just doing this for the hell of it. We're doing this because at the end of the line we are envisaging like all this money, these like heaps of money all over us, or the success of just being a successful poker player. It's such an achievement. It's far more impressive to be a successful poker player than it is to be a successful investment banker or something, in my opinion, because poker is seriously hard. It is like one of the hardest things I've ever came across in my life, and I'm naturally good at it, and it's still really hard. Like, yeah, I believe this may be a biased opinion. A lot of professions are equally or tough, or more tough, I should say, but I think that poker is like, in a sense, it just gives you such a vast array of difficulties that you need to overcome, and it's just really challenging, and it's always changing, and it's always adapting, so you always need to be ahead of the game. You always need to be putting in loads of work. It is not a sit at your desk and grind out a comfortable living type of job. If you're a poker player, it's the type of job where you need to always be evolving, adapting, changing, doing things better than everybody else, because you need to beat not only them but the rake. So yeah, it requires a lot. So yeah, always keep that in mind, that what you're doing is a very difficult feat, and it's not something that many people can do, and that's why, yeah. Anyway, I'm ranting a lot about this. This is an overview, so I've got loads to say on money and success and keeping that in mind, so we'll get onto that when it comes. So first of all, let's talk about the good player and what attributes the good player has. How does his mind work to make him good at poker, and what ways are those that maybe other people's minds don't work in? So logical ability and reasoning, as we touched on before. So the good poker player is always going to have a very solid chain of reasoning. He's always going to be inferring things, deducing things, making assumptions that are justified because of his evidence, considering lots of different evidence and building up a big justified picture instead of just taking like a few things and jumping to a conclusion. When I teach a student and they have what I would call an immature, undeveloped reasoning process, because perhaps their life doesn't involve loads of reasoning, like they aren't constantly debating things, or they aren't like making scientific discoveries and reasoning what implications they have or any of this. Like perhaps they work in some line that doesn't involve having to do much reasoning, and so they've not got a lot of practice with it. But again, don't worry, because we're going to get onto lots of ways that you can develop yourself to become better at reasoning and logical ability. If you're naturally horrible at logic, like poker is not for you, I'm afraid. Like if you're really horrible and you can't get any better. I had an ex-girlfriend that I tried to teach to play poker, who was very, very illogical when it came to things like this. Like, could not do anything that required reasoning, and so it didn't work. So, but yeah, I'm sure that almost everybody here watching this video has some degree of being able to reason and will be in the process of improving that, and that's what becoming a good poker player is. Composure. This is something you need. You need to stay composed. This goes back to what we were talking about last time in tilt. If you lack composure, that's when you become subject to tilt and all the horrible things that we covered in the section on the impact of tilt. All these horrible effects take place and damage your win rate and destroy your progress as a player and hold you back. So being able to stay composed is like being able to quit your sessions, being able to avoid tilt by just playing well even when things don't go your way. Having the discipline to, if you say you're going to study poker that evening, even if you're a little bit tired, you do it, having the composure just to stay focused on the goal and on your success as a player. Recognizing relevant factors. So this is something that I drum into my students. I feel it's by far the most overlooked thing, means of learning in the whole of the poker teaching community. I feel that nobody focuses on this enough, and I think the mistake that almost every new player makes, and it's a huge one, is that they don't know which factors are relevant to consider in the decision-making process. Why do beginners have such different ideas about what the right play is than strong players? It's not because they consider the same factors but get it wrong. That might happen to some extent, but usually it's because they're just considering the wrong things. For example, we have King 10 and we flat out the big blind. Say we're heads up. No, let's say we're at 6 max. And flop goes 3-way and it comes down King 8-4. Our opponent c-bets. It's us to act next. There's a guy behind us, and the new player sort of argues we should raise here because if we call, then we don't know where we're at and we don't know what we're going to do with the rest of the hand, so we should raise to find out where we're at, right? So the factor he's considered there is how easy the hand is to play and what allows him to find out what his opponent likely has. These are the factors that he's considered, and these are the factors that he's based his reasoning on for why we should raise. The more experienced player sort of comes back with, we shouldn't raise here because A, we're massively over-representing our hand, and that in turn leads to a situation where our opponent folds all the worst hands in his range and continues with the hands that beat us, and with all of the above. So he's continuing with any hand that beats us, so we're just losing money every single time he calls or raise, and when he folds we have the best hand anyway and are likely going to win the pot anyway. So what the more experienced player will argue is that it's your expected value from the raise that you need to think about, and not finding out more precisely what your opponent has. That's going to happen to some extent later in the hand, but to pay lots of money that you can only take down the pot with or lose if you're beat, just to find out some information. Oh look, he folded, we found out that he didn't have a good hand. Well done. If he had, oh he continued, we found out that he has his beat, but you've just paid far more money than you need to. Maybe a better plan would be just to call flop, call turn, and then fold river, and that way we make a lot more money the times that money goes in, because we let him put more money in with air, and we lose less money the times that money doesn't go in, because we're not having to make a big raise on the flop just to fold. Okay, so that's one example of recognizing the relevant factors. You know, your EV, the EV of the play, all these things. Each spot has completely different relevant factors, and when I do coaching, what I try to do is talk about, first ask my student, what do you think is relevant to consider here? And when they're a new player, for me it's quite frightening that they just don't have an answer to that, and that explains why they're not yet a great poker player. It's because they haven't yet deciphered which factors are relevant in which spots, and that's the sort of approach that I take, and I think probably other coaches take too. And I think but in terms of like videos I've watched, things I've seen, it doesn't get drummed in enough, so forgive me for dwelling, but that's why I'm going on about that a fair bit right now. You've got to know which factors you should be considering. So situation identification, this is kind of the same. If you can identify the situation, then you can identify the relevant factors of that situation. The more study you do off the felt, the more hands you assess where your opponent has raised your c-bet and he's quite aggressive and you have a marginal top pair and the board texture is like of this wetness. These are all situations that are never identical but are very similar quite a lot of the time. So if you do a lot of work on those off the table, then on the table your mind is very quickly going to go, that's situation X, I've already looked at that, I know that the relevant factors of this are this, and in this case these factors are A, B and C. Do you see what I mean? So it's like being able to determine the situation in turn leads you to be able to deem which factors are relevant, and that leads to you making the best decisions and winning the most money, to look at the very bigger picture of it. So yeah, and the way to improve, the good player has this situation identification skill because he's done enough work, he's watched enough videos, he's done enough like reading away from the table, he's done enough hand analysis, he's had coaching, he's done all these things that allow him to very quickly pinpoint situations so that he can then use the rest of his time bank, not to try and class the situation, but to go through the factors that he's already guaranteed are relevant to consider. Fast thought process. So not only does the good player, reason well, stay composed, recognize the right factors to look at, know the situation he's in. He also does all this very quickly. These things above are all the thought process, like doing all these things. They're the thought process, well, apart from the composure. But he does all these things fast because, again, he's trained his brain to operate in this way, and he's done that with the exercises, hopefully, that we're going to go over in the next couple of slides. But mainly, he's done that by using Poker Stove. Sorry, my cat was just going a bit crazy there. I think she's in the process of destroying a cardboard box, but I'm just going to check there's no one in my house. Awesome. It sounded very much like someone was just in my house. Anyway, so we can do all this quickly because he's been able to develop his mind to work in this way, and he's done that using all the tools that are accessible for him, like Grinder School and other training sites, and Poker Stove and Hold'em Manager reviews and Poker Tracker 3 reviews, and talking poker with his friends. That's very important too. He's spent a lot of time with other people in the community, just bouncing ideas, to the point that he's just trained his mind to be good at all these things, and he does it quickly. The more quickly you can cover the basics of your thought process, the more time in your time bank that you have for other tables, so you don't get mixed up. If you're multi-tabling, the more tables you can play, the more time you have to consider extra factors that might also be relevant that aren't automatic. It avoids autopiloting because you have this time to consider extra things. You don't confuse yourself by going over all this insignificant stuff first and wasting your time. Like, all these things, like doing all the right things quickly, is what makes a good player, and that's where you're headed. That's your goal as a poker student like yourselves. You're all sort of on that quest to become good at all these things, and in turn you will then be able to say, I'm a good player. And that's a very difficult thing. I wouldn't even call myself a good player. I would say that I'm experienced-ish now, and that I've got a lot more experience than newer players, and I've got good fast thought processes. But the key to becoming really good is just having better thought processes and considering more relevant factors quickly, identifying things more accurately, and having really, really solid reasoning and composure. The grinder mentality. So, being able to sit and play for 2 hours and not be phased when you lose a couple of stacks, being able to see the bigger picture and just grind, having your bankroll management, knowing exactly when you're going to move up to each stake, correctly sort of mixing your study time with your playing time, having commitment to poker, saying things like, I'm sorry, I can't hang out with you tonight because I have to review these hands, and just being really committed and having that mentality of a mass grinder. You don't have to be a mass grinder, but of a grinder, like it says here at the top, a professional poker player who earns a living through small but consistent winnings. Well, I wouldn't say you have to be a professional poker player to be a grinder. You could just be a part-time grinder for sure, as a lot of you guys are. But yeah, having that mentality. One thing that all grinders will have in common is that they make money through small but consistent winnings, or they at least try to. And yeah, all these things that make you a good player are the means with which you do that. So let's get into logic. Like, what is logic? How does it relate to poker? So one element of logic that's very important is deduction. So what is deduction? So deduction is the process, if I have to kind of going on the spot here with a definition, but I would go with something like deduction is the process of coming to one conclusion based on some premises, basically. Like, so based on some information, you then take that to arrive at a conclusion which you then know. So it's like getting knowledge by considering other pieces of evidence that are available to you. So for instance, a very simple basic example of deducing something in poker, your opponent is 9-7 at 6 max and he opens 6% of hands under the gun, because he opens the same in all positions, obviously. Some weird stuff. And the flop comes Queen 10-9. And you say, I don't think he ever has Jack 8. He never has that straight because he never opens it under the gun here. He doesn't even open king jack under the gun here, so he never has straight. You know for a fact that if he's going to be that tight over the huge sample that you have, that he just isn't opening these hands. You then deduce that he can't have that hand in his range, so therefore your set of queens is good. So that's like deducing. You've deduced that you always have the best hand based on the information of his stats. So that's like a logical deduction process, and it's very important, and that's a very simple example. You get many more complex examples in poker, and the best players, like we just said, they can do that very well. They can deduce things very well. Another thing the best players can do is inference, and there is often these terms I find are sort of misused in everyday language, like I infer and I deduce are often sort of taken to mean the same thing when in fact they don't. So inference is a less solid, less certain way of coming to a conclusion from evidence. So I infer that tomorrow the sun will rise, right? That is an inference. I can't deduce that it will, because I cannot be absolutely 100% like infallible about that. Like, it may not. Obviously it very likely will, but I can't deduce it. I don't have evidence that says it's definitely going to happen. The fact that it's happened a billion times in the past, that doesn't necessarily follow from that it's going to rise tomorrow. So that would be an inference. That's a very strong inference. It's almost like you've deduced it. But weaker inference, like a poker type inference, maybe something like my opponent doesn't 3-bet very much, therefore he probably doesn't 4-bet very much. So that would be a kind of inference. If a guy isn't 3-betty as a bluff, it's very strange for him to then be 4-betty as a bluff. It's just not in his nature, you know. If a guy calls lots and lots of C-bets, but we don't have any information on how he plays against 3-bets, it's likely he's going to be a bit stationary with those too, so we should 3-bet a wider value range. These are all inferences. I infer that I should 3-bet ace-jack for value here, because this guy has some general stationary tendencies, and therefore, although we have no information on his 3-bet calling stat, we can sort of infer that he's likely to call a lot, and call with a lot of dominated hands. So that's one example. Can't get away from my computer, thanks. That would be one example of, yes, shush, she's very noisy sometimes. So that's one example of inference in poker. It's a bit weaker than deduction, but again, it's such a cool skill to have. Like, I'll look at my HUD, you may see this in my videos, and I'll say like, alright, I got 7 hands on this guy. He limped once, so I infer from that he's probably a weaker player, and I should just value bet more against him than I should bluff. So we don't know that. It's not necessarily the case. If we deduced it, we would be basing it on something like we saw him call down in like all these spots before, really light, and he's all crazy and stuff. But we just infer it from the fact that he's limped, that he's probably a weaker player, blah blah blah. So you get the picture. Both of these are things you need to be able to do. Deduction is a more solid process, and inference is like a way of sort of stealing information based on things that you shouldn't really know. Like, you don't know anything about how he relates to 3-bets, but look, you've got all this other information that, although it isn't directly related, you can find a way of relating it, and it can suggest things to you. So yeah. So this is like as basic as it gets. Well, not quite. This is a very basic just example of logic. If you don't follow this, then you need to take a minute and look at it and make sure you understand it, because when you sort of form logic about poker situations, it's way more complicated than this. This might be scary to someone who doesn't know about logic just because it's got letters that stand for things in it and words like therefore, but it's really not. So if A then B, so if we have A then we have B. Let's like give this some poker relevance. So let's say that A stands for let's say A stands for folds ace queen before the flop. Let's say folds ace queen under the gun in 6 max. So, and then we can say B has a B pip below 10 from under the gun, and then we can say C is nitty under the gun. So So if my opponent folds ace queen under the gun, then he has a VPIP below 10. If my opponent has a VPIP below 10, then he's a nit under the gun. My opponent folds ace queen under the gun, therefore he is nitty under the gun. So we've kind of made a deduction because we know one thing, we then infer others. Those are like very obvious things that we don't need to formulate in this way to know that we know them, but it's a good way of just sort of showing you how logic functions, like the key sort of elements of logic function in poker. I could have thought of a better example, sorry if that wasn't the best, but I think it's okay. And this is like another quote that sort of from myself that I made today. I don't mean to sound arrogant by putting these in quotes, I just want to sort of, if I think it sounds nice and catchy, which is what I'm trying to do with these presentations, then I sort of like put it in a quote just to show you that it's something that I think is worth remembering. So, poker is a web made up of an almost infinite amount of logical puzzles. I think this is definitely the case. I think that obviously there have to be a non-infinite amount of situations that can arise in poker. You've only got so many combinations of cards, player types, stats on your HUD, information. You have a near infinite amount of them because there's just so many billions and billions of factors. So you're never really going to see the exact same spot twice. But you still have this like almost infinite amount. It's still not infinite. But it's all consisting of these logical puzzles. Every new spot is a new logical puzzle to be reasoned through and solved. And that's why problem solving and logic and deduction and all these things come into it, and that's why they make like a really good sort of poker player. Don't be like deterred by this if like it's the first time you've thought about it in this way. You probably do all these things naturally. You probably reason therefore this at the table just because you've never sat down and thought what I'm doing right now is deducing. It doesn't mean that you don't do it, it's just like you've never really thought about it, and I'm just sort of trying to be a bit more theoretical here and sort of go through what good players do and do well. So yeah, always remember every time you see a new spot, this is a puzzle and it's solvable. All puzzles in poker are solvable. Whether they're solvable for you is a different thing. You might not have the capacity to solve it, but you should always try and solve it, and you should never just guess. If you're running out of time, then maybe you have to, but you should always just try to come to the best conclusion you can and have a bash at the answer, so to speak. And there's not always just one answer. Sometimes the answer will be this and this are very similar, and it's unclear which is better based on the information we have, so do either. Like, maybe you need to have 35% equity to call a bet on the river, and you think that, you know, you probably have somewhere between 32 and 38%, so it's unclear whether you should call or fold. You should probably call because you get information in that case, but you know what I mean, it's pretty unclear. So there's not always one right answer to the puzzles, but there's always like a way to go that's going to yield the most money. So what ways can we train our brain to be awesome at poker within the realm of poker? Like, what kind of poker related activities are there? This is, a lot of you might think this is kind of obvious, but you've got Poker Stove, which if you don't have and you're watching this video, you need to download now. It's free. I assume it'll always be free, but who knows? So just get it and start using it, because for one, you can use it when you play hands to go over the hand and plug in a range for your opponent, find out how much equity you have versus that range. And secondly, you can just sit and play with it in your time away from the table. You could just sit there and be like, right, I wonder how much equity Ace King has against a range of 9s plus, Ace Queen plus. And that way, like, you become more familiar with these things. Any work you do away from the table is going to yield better results on the table, because your thought processes and all these things we just covered that make good players good are faster, and that's obviously something we want. Also available to you and mandatory for your development as a player is session analysis. So many people, I've had people come to me for coaching who have never done a session review. Like, and I guess there's just not enough stuff out here, and it's kind of like doing coaching and seeing that people didn't really know how to learn and how to improve independently, and that kind of made me want to make a video about what things you should always do. So session analysis, look at the hands you lost, look at the hands you won, look at the main pots that happened that day while they're still fresh in your head, while you still know your reads, take some notes at the time on your reads if you need to, for analysis sake, and go over it. Put your opponent on a range, come to the conclusion that you made a mistake or whatever, or that you didn't, and then learn from that mistake. Another way you can learn is to watch other people analyse their hands, your hands, hands they're playing, hands their students have played, and you can do this via training videos. When you watch a training video on Grinder School, the instructor's always analysing a hand and trying to get you to learn from it. So that's basically just like an extension of session analysis. It's very helpful because there's often going to be things that you're missing in your own analysis. Like if you don't know how to go about analysing a spot, then you either need to watch a video about it or post it on a forum. Mainly just post it, but these videos build up your sort of repertoire of poker knowledge, just so that you know how to approach a spot next time you're analysing your game, and it's really awesome. Hiring a coach is like the most awesome shortcut in the world if you want to like jump from A to D without going through B and C. So the thing that coaching does is that it greatly accelerates your learning. When you're learning on your own and via videos, you're going to get a lot of information. You're going to be bombarded with all this information, and you're not always going to know how to apply it. You're sometimes going to apply the wrong things in the wrong spots. Again, going back to relevant factors that we need to consider. We're often going to be doing that. We're often going to be making mistakes, getting into the habit of always thinking about this factor even though it's not important all the time. All these things. But when you hire a coach, the coach can sort of say to you, right, in that spot you don't do that and here's why. And they get right to the heart of the issue. They're not feeding you general information like videos are. They're not giving you sort of general, in this spot I do this. They're saying, in this exact hand that you've been thinking about, your mistake in analysing it was that you didn't think of that. Or they're saying, you need to start doing this in your analysis. Or, you know, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? These things are relevant here because of this. And they're going through all these things with you, so that what it does is it just creates this good poker player far quicker who can do all this themselves, because they've had the personal one-on-one coaching. And it's just like, I'm not trying to like in any way sell coaching here, but coaching in general speeds up your learning. It's not essential, you can definitely do without it, but it's awesome. But yeah, a lot of people would rather get there on their own, and that's totally understandable as well. But it just means, and you may learn a lot that way too, but if you're one of these impatient people, you might just want to sort of save some time, especially if you've got like a job and other things going on in your life and you'd rather play more and not have to study as much. Then that's where getting a coach sort of comes in handy. So work off the felt, all these things, poker stove, session analysis, videos, coaching, everything you do off the felt to help your game, all lead to a better thought process on the felt. So it's very important that you don't just get into the habit of playing lots and never sort of going over it, never revising, never analysing your game. If you fall into that pattern, then what's likely to happen is you'll develop a load of bad habits, and then you'll find yourself in 2 years' time still not really gone anywhere. Then one day you'll finally get a coach, and you'll be like, you've been doing this wrong for the last 2 years. So always, try and discover on your own like what you're doing wrong, and always think about the way you're playing and objectively, like, do you like the way you played that hand? Why not? Post it. The forums is another way. I didn't write that down there, but posting hands in the forums, that's how I learned, was posting on a forum, getting a lot of good feedback by much better players, being told I wasn't as great as I thought I was, because I thought I was awesome at poker when I wasn't. I was a fish, and being told that was great. Outwith Poker. So poker's getting a bit tedious, you're on a downswing, you're sick of it, but you want to like work on your mind. You love problem solving, you love all these things, and you want to get better at logic and better at puzzles, because that's going to help you make more money via poker, and also it's fun, because I certainly love these things. One passion of mine is chess. Might not be everyone's cup of tea, but I've been getting back into it again recently. It sort of comes and goes, but like, I love playing competitive chess live. It's so much fun. You get like a grading, trying to improve it and all that. But the main reason that it's important when it comes to poker is that chess is basically poker without the luck. So you don't get any fish in chess that play you for money. Of course not. Why would anyone play when they're almost definitely going to lose? That's why variance is our friend in poker. But chess is fun. It's a very good way to work on your logical sort of deduction skills, and it's going to make you a better poker player. Trains your brain to function in that way, and it will very quickly make you better at logic, because it is just pure logic. Like, it's just complete logic. That's all there is to it. There's a bit of creativity probably, people have argued. But yeah, maths is another thing, which this isn't for me. I don't really like maths, but a lot of people like it. If you prefer, if you want to take up, say, one of these Outwith Poker activities just to help your brain for poker, then maybe maths is for you. Maybe you enjoy it. Maybe you want to do some mild maths just to work on your logical faculties. One thing I do is philosophy. That's what I study at school. And arguments, like forming logical, structured arguments. Again, I've seen the word logic like a billion times here, but again, it's going to help you. It's interesting. There's lots of cool topics to debate about, to consider arguments about, consider whether you agree with them, why not. You can see, like, what's going on here, that there is a correlation between these things in poker. They're not just in here for the hell of it. They're in here because I feel there's a very strong correlation in the faculties that you use mentally for each thing. Logic in everyday life, just try to be more logical as you go about your life. If you find yourself like jumping to a conclusion, just sort of sit back and try and deduce what a better course of action might be. Everyone uses logic in life, just some people are better at it than others. Then there's puzzles, like if you're like one of these people that enjoys like really fun puzzles like Sudoku or whatever. I don't really do this myself, but a lot of people do this. Working things out, computer games that have puzzles in them are very good too. Last night I played the game Portal for the first time, which is a big giant puzzle about forming portals and sort of transporting yourself about this horrible like synthetic world using these portals, avoiding these traps, like getting to the next exit. It's really fun. Seriously recommend that game. That's one example of puzzle games that help you in this way. So yeah, I'm not saying you have to do any of this. It's just that like there's certainly nothing wrong with just playing poker and that being your number one hobby, and just doing that and using that to build your logical skills. That'll make you a better player for sure. But if you want to mix it up, and I for one get bored if I do the same thing all the time. That's why I do philosophy as well. I don't want to grind full time. I want to get a degree as well. That's why I play chess, because it's fun and it's less stressful because there's not money on it all the time, and it's just a nice way of sort of have this passion for logic and problem solving that I'm sure most of us here do that play poker. Most of us will have a passion for this kind of thing, so that's why I suggest these other things. And this is by no way an exhaustive list. There's probably like so many activities as well that'll help you become a better poker player. Look into it, use your imagination and see what else you might want to do to help you. Just a suggestion. You don't have to. You can just stick to the poker, whatever. Long ball. So you need to train your brain as well to just think in terms of the long term all the time. And you need to remember that variance is your friend. We shouldn't be mad at variance. Yeah, we can shake our fist at it when it screws us over for the 100th time that day. But we can't let it aggravate us, and we can't let it cause tilt. Variance is obviously the number one cause of tilt. But if we weren't human, if we were like robots that could program ourselves, we would never be mad at variance, because we would understand that it allows the fish to play. If there are no variants and the fish never get lucky, then the fish never play poker, and you just lose money to the rake playing against other grinders like yourselves. So you need these guys to make a lot of money, and you need variants in order for these guys to play. So it's your friend, and try to always remember that. Might make it easier next time you take a nasty beat. Just remember that you're going to have the last laugh because the fish is going to bust to his roll in a few days, whereas you are going to build an empire of poker wealth via grinder school learning and your own sort of motivations and work ethic. Is going to lead you to be far more successful than these clowns that are winning pots from you. They may suck out on you this time, they may be laughing about it over there in Belarus or whatever, but you're sat there pretty happy because overall, like, you've trained your brain to know that you're going to have the last laugh, because you'll PTR them in 3 days and they'll have lost $3,000 and you'll be up loads. So again, that's long ball. Every decision matters. Every single decision. Like, I can't stress that enough. Any decision you make has a direct impact on your win rate. Not only because it'll lead to it being plus or negative EV, also because when you make a decision and you think it was the right one, you're more likely to make that decision again in the future, right? So we've got like a sort of copycat behaviour where you made a play, you felt good about it, and so you did it again, time and time again. Now, if you've made a good decision, that's fine because you're increasing your EV. However, if you've made a bad decision carelessly but it worked, then you're going to get some sort of positive reinforcement for a bad thing. Poker will do that to you a lot. Get used to it. And you're going to end up making more bad choices, so every decision really matters. But what matters more than decisions are habits, because habits are long-lasting. A habit results in the same decision being made over and over again. If you always c-bet pot, like I've seen people who do this, then you think it's right to always c-bet the pot. You do this like hundreds of times a week because you play so much poker and you get into so many situations. You know, a c-bet spot is such a common thing that happens in poker. If every time your sizing is bad, then, and it's not flexible and it's not dynamic, then you're going to be losing a load of money because you're habitually doing something over and over again that sucks. So developing bad habits is the worst thing you can do because they just continue to cost you every single time the situation comes up. It's like a huge like add-on like effect that never goes away. It just compiles and makes you lose a lot of money, or makes your win rate a lot worse. So this is why it's so important to train your brain to be a good poker player, because by doing all this practice with logic and all this practice with analysing videos, coaching, all these things, they bash out the bad habits, and that's why if you do these things you're going to have success. Whereas the guy who decides that his ego is too big to listen to anyone else and he knows it all already, he has so many bad habits that he never gets rid of, and that's why he looks back in 2 years and thinks, oh, I've made nothing. In fact, I've lost money. So habits are very important. Fix them. And if you, that's another thing why coaching is good, because the coach can look at your game objectively and say, you have bad habits X, Y, and Z. They're really costing you money here. They're really making it the case that you're gonna bash your win rate over the long term. So you need to fix these before you do anything else. A win rate is a sensitive thing. That's why these habits are so damaging. A win rate is very easy to ruin. Like, a win rate, like I said in the last video, is comprised of making lots and lots and lots and lots of great decisions over the long term. One good decision doesn't improve your win rate much. What improves your win rate is consistently making all these really good choices when your opponents are making bad choices, or, you know, mediocre choices. So that's the point. If you have one day where you're playing badly and you make like 16 bad decisions in a row that cost you big pots, and they're all in big pots, that's going to like destroy your win rate for all the hundreds of good decisions you made in small pots. And the same goes, like, if you're making bad decisions in small pots over and over again, that's also going to destroy your win rate. Your win rate's very sensitive. It's very subject to changing and fluctuation based on variance, but also based on sort of how well you do. It's important to think of your win rate as something that's only accurate over a very large sample. Like, if you play 15,000 hands at say 25 NL and you have a 4 big bet win rate, so what? Like, it doesn't really mean that much. I don't have the exact figures for this right now, unfortunately, because I wasn't going to go into it in that much depth, but it means that I think it means your win rate is somewhere between like -2 big bets and 8 big bets or something. Like, it's that sort of vague. If you play 100,000 hands, I think your win rate is within 2 or 3 big bets of your true win rate. That means that you could be break even and be losing at 3 big bets over 100,000 hands. You could be break even and winning at 3 big bets. You could be winning at 3 big bets when you're in fact a break even player. So you need to not be obsessed. Yes, it's very good that you won over the short term. It means it's very likely that you are a winning player, but not necessarily, and it still means that there's probably loads of stuff you can improve on and fix. Like variance, don't underestimate variance, because it's more extreme than anyone realises when they play poker, especially if you play heads up or six max. So money and success, like, you need to always train your mind to think about these things, because if you don't have the inspiration of why you're doing it, then you're not going to be as motivated and you're not going to make as many great decisions. Because it's always going to be the case that you're just lacking the drive. The cat there, I think, if you heard her, I think she's motivated by food, and that's why she meows very insistently. She's very persistent with her meowing, because she really, really wants the food. If she didn't want the food so much, she would just give up and not meow, and then no one would pay her any attention, so she might not get as much food. So she's got it figured out. You know, you need to have an incentive to get stuff. So, ambition, whatever your poker ambition is, whether it's to become the next Tom Dwan, whether it's to just make a stable living, whether it's for a bit of side income, whether it's to save up for some holiday, whatever it is, you know, remind yourself of it, keep it in your head. Freedom it's a question mark there, because it's not everybody's choice. Like, not everyone wants to become a winning poker player, to the point that they do it as their job, and they have the freedom. Some people are quite happy with like a structure of a routine job, and that's very understandable, but a lot of people, you'll find that there's a few things that people in the poker community have in common, and that's usually a lust for freedom, a love of success, and a love of logic. They're usually the most logical, yet sort of ambitious freedom seekers that you ever find are in the poker world, and there are a lot of good people here. I think they're all very good traits to have. Certainly not a negative thing, but poker gives you a lot of freedom. Like, if I make money from making these videos or coaching, I've got the flexibility of when I do it, and that for me is awesome. There's no constraint. Obviously you need to be there for your students, but you don't have to be there 9 to 5 clocking in. And when you play poker, you've got even more freedom, because it's only you that dictates it. But my point is that there's more to poker than just grinding. If you ever want to get into the teaching side of it, or the sort of more the off the table side of poker, you want a poker site, you need to know about poker, you want to run like a forum, whatever you want to do that's poker related, you're going to have a lot of freedom, and that's why it's so attractive as an industry to go into. So keep that in mind if that's your goal. Always remind yourself of the freedom. If you're working a part-time job and you're grinding, and you're working a really shitty job, and you're using poker to pay your way through education, through university or whatever, then you can remind yourself how much you hate that job. That's another ambition, and you're using the poker as a way to fund your escape from having to work in that convenience store or whatever. So always focus on the goal. That's kind of been covered, whatever your goal may be. Drawing inspiration, you need to have people who inspire you. I have discussed a lot of poker with a lot of people in my time in the community, and there are certain people whose work ethic, whose sort of attention to detail just really inspires me and makes me want to get better at the game and makes me want to learn loads. And those guys, when you find them, watch their videos, do sweats with them, talk to them, because they're going to motivate you, and you're going to see like how successful they are, and it's like a role model. You want to be that successful too. That's why we have this culture of role models, although it's a bit crazy these days that to be a role model all you've got to do is appear on some dumb TV show and shout about something that's stupid. But yeah, real role models are like musicians. You always you ask a musician who like inspires you, they've always got this list of these people who they find inspirational, these phenomenal people who have created all this great music. And same with art, the same with like business, even all these fields like business, economics, science. There's always role models who inspire people, and poker is no different. So find inspiration from others who have succeeded, and if you're surrounded by players who are also struggling, like your fellow Grinder School students or your friends, and you're not quite at that stage yet where you're awesome at poker, then it's refreshing to look at people who have made it and sort of try and learn from them and draw inspiration from them. So you want to have an ego to an extent. It's healthy to be competitive. It's healthy to want to win all the time and to want to be better than everyone else. That's totally healthy. What's not healthy is to think that you are already somehow more justified and better than anyone else. You don't deserve anything. Like, poker owes you nothing at all. It never owes you a thing. Everything you make from poker, you make through your own hard work. Your fucking sweat that you spend every day grinding and learning. All these things that if you're motivated, it comes from your hard work, and that's how you become good. Your ego doesn't make you good, and you shouldn't even have one unless you've got something to be like especially proud of. I don't think anyone should ever have an ego. anyway, but that's just my opinion. A lot of people would think that you deserve to be arrogant and sort of superior to people if you've earned it. I don't believe that's the case. And I've seen a lot of people who play poker, start off as nice guys, become really good, and then start treating people like shit. Like, that's horrible. You shouldn't do that. But it's okay. It's healthy to have a really competitive ego and to be like, yeah, I'm good. I am good at poker. I'm the best at 100 NL because I worked hard. And yeah, that's cool. But when you start taking it to the extreme of being an egomaniac, that's not cool. So there's a fine line, but it's good to have. If you're going to have an ego, make sure it's one that's actually justified. Like, when you start off in poker, like, don't be condescending to people, don't be patronizing to new fish that come along, because it sticks out like a sore thumb. Like, it's so obvious that you don't fit in with that attitude. The people who do have that attitude only get away with it because they actually help people a lot and they're good and they're respected. If you're a new player, yes, you might be better than the very new guy that just came along, but you start like putting him down and stuff. This is like a forum sort of culture thing, but the same goes on the site. Like, don't talk shit to your opponents all the time just because you think you're better than them. Remember, the fish are your friends. Keep your ego in check at all times and you'll do much better. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So that's pretty much everything for now. Next time I'm going to be back with grind strategy, and we're going to talk about all the sort of paraphernalia of being a grinder and what other sort of non-poker things, like non-actual technical things, you should be doing. So that should be interesting. I may even make more of these. I've got other ideas, but I'm going to do these 3 for now. Then I'll get back to some actual grinding poker for you guys, because I'm sure you miss live videos, although you've got other instructors doing that. Let me know what you think about these videos, as always. And yeah, have a good February at the tables. Play well. Don't tilt. Improve your logic. And I'll see you guys next time when we talk about grind strategy. This has been Characters for Grinderschool.com, and I'll see you guys later.